Hello, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I share simple, quiet stories about life, love, and the little feelings we all go through. If that sounds like something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber gives me a little more encouragement to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin today's story. The breeze off the lake swept through like a soft hand brushing against bare skin, carrying the gentle chill of a Maine summer. The sky was so clear you could trace every lazy white cloud drifting overhead, and the old pine at the forest's edge still whispered like it had for decades. The dirt road leading to the cabin was mossy, worn down by memory, and today, once again, bore the tire marks of those who had come home. Claire's silver SUV rolled to a stop in front of the porch. She turned off the engine, but didn't get out right away. Beside her, her 12-year-old daughter, Emma, had drifted off, one earbud still hanging loose. The acoustic song had just ended, leaving a hush filled only with wind and memory.
Emma, wake up, sweetie, we're here.
Emma rubbed her eyes and looked out the window. There it was, the familiar wooden cabin, where her grandparents lived, where her mum grew up, where the family gathered every summer, but this time it felt quieter.
Still that crooked porch, huh, Mom?
Yep. Grandpa probably said I'll fix it this summer again. He always says that.
They got out. Claire opened the trunk and pulled out their bags. Emma paused, scanning the yard where her cousins used to shout and run wild. Now, only the buzzing of cicadas and the hush of faded childhood memories lingered. Claire's bond with the house ran deeper than just nostalgia. It was a part of her, born here, raised here, then left like every small-town kid with big dreams. But the one who stayed was her mother, Margaret, the woman who still lived in this house with her husband, Tom. A quiet and principled man. Claire glanced up at the porch, where the old wind chimes swayed crookedly, clicking in the breeze. She sighed.
Mom never changes a thing. It's all exactly the same.
They stepped onto the porch. The wooden door opened without a knock. Inside, it smelled of old pine, baked cookies, and something else, something like time and the silent work of a woman who never sat still. The main hallway had oak floorboards and was lined with picture frames, family moments, birthdays, Christmases, Thanksgivings. Claire barely glanced, but Emma stopped.
Mom!
What is it, hun?
Everyone in these pictures is smiling. Why isn't Grandma?
Claire froze, turned back. Emma was staring at the Christmas photo from... Tom raised a wine glass. David, Claire's older brother, laughed beside his wife and two kids. Luke, the youngest, always the free spirit, threw up bunny ears behind Claire's head. Everyone smiled, except Margaret standing in the back, lips pressed, eyes steady. Claire walked closer. It wasn't just one photo. Birthday 2010, Margaret holding the cake, everyone clapping. She looked down. Thanksgiving. Same thing. A string of smiling faces and one quiet mother who never smiled.
Maybe she was thinking about something else. You know Grandma always busy.
But no one's busy during a photo. Everyone's standing still.
Claire didn't answer. Something inside her shifted, a subtle, creeping unease. They walked into the living room where Tom sat reading the newspaper. In his 60s now, his silver hair was neatly combed, his shirt buttoned even at home. He looked up, set the paper aside.
You two made it.
I texted, Dad, didn't you see it?
I did, but I was waiting for the doorbell. Sounds more like home.
Did you fix the swing, Grandpa?
I said I'd fix it, never said which summer.
Laughter broke the quiet that had settled since the hallway. But Claire couldn't shake the image from her mind. From the kitchen, Margaret emerged, same posture, shoulders slightly hunched, a dish towel in hand. She used to be beautiful in that strong, unassuming way. Time had softened her face, but her eyes held something steady and deep.
Long drive, you two okay?
We're good. Mom, roads were clear.
Hungry, I made the roast chicken with cream sauce you love, and Emma's cookies, your recipe from last year.
You actually remembered.
I remember everything you say if you say it with your heart.
Claire looked at her mother. Margaret hadn't changed, still caring down to the smallest detail, standing behind the meals, the gifts, the smiles, but never stepping into the spotlight herself. Dinner that night was like every other summer. David had arrived earlier and was now pacing the porch on a work call. Luke had just come from the airport. The family was all here, 3 grown kids, 1 grandchild, 2 aging parents. But something about it tasted like things unsaid. Emma sat next to Margaret, quiet, thoughtful. Her eyes kept drifting toward the frames above the fireplace.
Grandma,
Yes, dear.
how come everyone's smiling in the photos, but not you?
The table went still. Tom's fork paused mid-air. David froze mid-sleeve roll. Claire looked up, but before she could speak, Margaret answered.
Maybe I was thinking about something else. Pictures aren't always taken in the happiest moments.
But it's all of them. Every one. You always stand straight, but you don't smile.
Maybe I didn't feel the need to.
A thin hush fell over the table, like morning fog. Not because Emma was wrong, but because she'd touched something no one else had dared to touch. Claire chewed the last bite slower than usual. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind, like the wind chime at midnight. Grandma always stood in the pictures, but she was never really in them. The clink of a plate lightly hitting the wooden table echoed awkwardly in the silence that had settled heavier than usual. Dinner went on, but the flavor had changed. Not because the roast chicken was a little drier than usual, or because the wine was missing, but because Emma's question still hung in the air like smoke, refusing to clear. Margaret cleared the dishes, gently brushing off every offer of help. David stepped out to the porch for a phone call. Tom retreated to the living room with the newspaper still folded in his hand. Claire and Emma stayed behind in the kitchen, wiping down the table. The echo of Emma's question lingered, quietly.
You know, when you said that, it was like throwing cold water on everyone.
I didn't mean to, I just saw it.
I know, it's just, grown-ups don't like being reminded of what they've ignored.
But if we don't remind them, then who will notice?
Claire didn't respond right away. She dried her hands on a towel, her eyes drifting toward the hallway lined with family photos. Once symbols of joy, they now felt like evidence of something missing. She stepped out of the kitchen and walked down the hall. Emma followed quietly. Claire stopped at her wedding photo 14 years ago. White dress, bright flowers, her ex-husband's half-smile, and at the far edge of the frame, Margaret standing beside Tom, expression solemn, eyes lost in another thought. Claire moved on to the photo from Margaret's 50th birthday, the one where Margaret was supposed to be the center. But she wasn't. Not in the middle, not hugging anyone, not smiling. Her eyes were locked on little Emma, 3 years old, then eating cake with both hands.
She always stands a bit back, like she's watching to make sure nothing goes wrong.
She's always been the one standing behind, even when I was little.
From the staircase, Luke came down with a glass of water. He wore an old T-shirt, hair tousled, typical of a wandering artist, seeing them staring at the wall of photos. He raised an eyebrow.
Photo wall ceremony again.
Have you ever seen Mom really smile in any of these?
What do you mean?
I mean a real smile, not a pressed lip one, not polite, a genuine smile.
Luke looked up, like it was the first time he truly noticed. His eyes scanned the frames. Christmas, Thanksgiving, the lake trip in. Margaret was in them, always there, but never in the spotlight, never shining.
I never paid attention.
I did, earlier. She said didn't feel the need yet. What does that even mean?
Maybe. Maybe she thought people needed her to handle things more than they needed her to smile.
Claire folded her arms, a strange discomfort rising inside her. Part of her was angry with herself for never noticing, for always assuming Mum was fine. David stepped in from the porch, slipping his phone into his pocket. He saw them gathered by the photos and walked over.
What's going on?
Do you ever remember seeing Mom smile in any of these pictures?
Of course. I mean, at my birthday, didn't she?
No, she was behind me. She didn't smile, I remember.
David backed up slightly, arms crossed, his expression turning defensive.
These things don't matter. Photos are just photos. Mom's fine. She loves cooking, taking care of everyone. That's how she shows love.
Or maybe it's what she was taught to do.
And smiling wasn't part of the lesson.
The air turned tense. Emma stepped back, confused as to why the grown-ups talked so much and still hadn't given her a real answer. Claire looked back at the photos, truly seeing them for the first time. Mum was in every memory, but never really in them. A sharp crash came from the kitchen, the sound of a plate breaking. Everyone jumped. Margaret stood there, quiet, bending down to gather the shards.
Mom, let me do that.
It's fine, just a plate.
But everyone knew a broken plate could be replaced. What had just cracked in the hearts of the family wouldn't be so easy to fix. Night fell softly, like a quilt draped gently over the woods. In the forest, the hum of insects played like a soundtrack to memory. The lakeside cabin glowed with the warm amber of nightlights, the faint scent of apple pie and coffee drifting through the halls. Everyone had retreated to their rooms except Claire. She sat alone in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through her photo library. Each swipe was a breath. A moment, graduation, beach trips, her wedding, and in every memory, her mother Margaret was there, always present, never centered, never smiling wide. A soft creak from the door. Luke walked in, holding a mug of tea. He sat across from Claire, his gaze rising to the wall where the frames hung thick.
You're still up.
So are you?
Think Mom's asleep.
Probably. She's always the last to go to bed and the first to wake up.
Has been her whole life.
They sat in silence under the dim lamp. Shadows stretched long across the wooden walls. Claire set her phone down on the table, exhaled deeply.
Remember when we were kids, and Dad got angry? Who always stood between us?
Mom.
When David and I fought over that dog in the yard who didn't take sides, just quietly cleaned up the mess?
Mom.
Claire leaned her head back, eyes on the ceiling. They shimmered, not with tears, but with something raw and newly surfaced.
But do you ever remember Mom crying?
No.
Yelling, complaining, saying she was tired?
Oh, no.
She turned to her brother, the one who left home the moment he was old enough, who only came back every few years, and now was the only one listening.
You know, I did see her cry once.
Really?
I was 14. That night, Mom and Dad argued about David applying to college without telling them. Mom didn't yell. She didn't cry then either. But later that night, I got thirsty, came downstairs, and saw her in the kitchen, just standing there, pressing her face into a dish towel.
Did she know you saw?
No, I turned away, and never brought it up.
Claire clenched her hands. That memory, forgotten or buried, was now vivid, like it happened last night. Luke set his mug down, quiet.
I've got one too. Never told anyone.
What is it?
5th grade. There was this field trip. Each kid got to invite a parent. I didn't invite Mom. I invited Dad.
Oh.
I thought she wouldn't know anything about camping. I was afraid the other kids would laugh.
Luke lowered his head, voice quieter now.
But that night, I came home late, saw Mom folding a sleeping bag, checking a flashlight. No one asked her to. She had prepared because she thought I'd choose her.
Claire froze. She didn't know what to say. She simply placed a hand on her brother's, an unspoken, overdue apology for them both.
I never said sorry. She never brought it up.
She keeps everything inside, shares it with no one.
They both sighed, in perfect sync. Their eyes drifted to the frame near the fireplace, 1997, a family picnic in the woods. David holding a fishing rod, Claire covered in mud, Luke grinning beside the firewood pile, and Margaret, again on the far edge, not smiling, not looking into the lens.
Maybe it's not that she didn't want to smile.
Maybe she never felt allowed to.
The flicker of the fireplace danced across their faces in warm orange hues, but inside, something colder stirred a clear. Sharp realization all three of Margaret's children had grown up inside her love, and not one had ever asked if she was okay. The kitchen clock struck 12, its soft chimes echoing faintly. Outside, the moon had climbed high, casting silver light through the trees, leaving hazy shadows dancing across the wooden hallway floor. Inside the quiet cabin, only the wind rustling the roof and the creak of old floorboards hinted that someone was still awake. Emma stepped out from the living room, barefoot on the cool floor, wandering down the hallway. She couldn't sleep. The questions from dinner kept replaying in her mind. Why didn't Grandma ever smile? Why had no one ever asked? She paused when she saw a faint light slipping out from under the kitchen door. Carefully, she pushed it open. Inside, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table. No bright lights, just the soft glow from the stovetop lamp casting shadows over her face. In front of her was a steaming cup of tea and an open journal. Emma stood silently for a moment. She had never seen her grandmother like this, not cooking, not cleaning, not speaking, just quiet.
Can't sleep, Grandma.
I don't need as much sleep as you do, sweetheart.
I can't sleep either. I keep thinking about the pictures.
Margaret closed her journal and gestured for Emma to sit. Emma pulled out a chair gently, resting her chin in her hands. Her eyes locked on her grandmother's face.
Are you sad?
Why do you think that?
Because you don't smile in the pictures. Not just one, all of them.
Margaret stared into her cup of tea. Her eyes weren't sad or angry, just distant. The gaze of someone who'd seen a lot.
Maybe I didn't think it mattered. When you're busy caring for others, you don't stop to think about how you look.
But no one told you that you had to care for everyone.
No, but no one said don't either, so I just kept going.
Emma pondered this, her fingers tapping her cheek. Then she asked a question, simple, honest, and so sharp it made Margaret pause mid-breath.
Are you happy?
The kitchen fell still. Even the crickets outside seemed to stop. Margaret turned slowly toward her this time. Her eyes didn't flinch.
What do you think happiness means?
It's laughing a lot, hugging people you love, saying the things that make you happy, and the ones that make you sad too.
Margaret nodded, her eyes growing glassy.
Then maybe I've missed out on a few of those parts.
Emma didn't say anything. She simply reached out and placed her small hand over her grandmother's weathered one. No words, just warmth.
You're the first person who's ever asked me that in 63 years.
Emma's small shoulders quivered. She tightened her grip.
I don't want you to just be the one in the background of the photos. I want you in the middle. You deserve to be in the middle.
Margaret let out a small laugh, not one to break the silence, but a real laugh. Thin, soft, honest. For the first time that night. She leaned her head gently onto her granddaughter's shoulder. Quiet. Long enough for Emma to feel her own heartbeat slow. Outside the window, the moon slowly shifted behind the treetops, leaving behind a shadow of two figures, one old, one young, sitting together like two pieces of memory stitched across a single, heartfelt question. Claire woke in the middle of the night to an emptiness beside her. She reached out, touched the cold sheets. Emma wasn't there. The clock read 1.
4 a.m. A dim golden light crept up from downstairs. painting soft lines across the hallway. She got out of bed, barefoot. Descending the stairs without turning on the lights, she had memorized every creaky board since she was 8.
Halfway down, Claire stopped. Through the slightly cracked kitchen door, she saw Emma sitting beside Margaret. The two of them said nothing, just sat, hand in hand. And Margaret, unaware she was being watched, rested her head gently on the little girl's shoulder, eyes closed, lips curled into a faint smile. That smile Claire had never seen before. Not the one for photos, not the familiar "I'm fine" smile. This was real tired, fragile, but peaceful. Claire didn't enter. She stood still, one hand on the banister, her throat tightening. All these years she had lived alongside this woman and never really seen her. Before her were 2 generations, one rising, one fading quietly in between them. No words, just understanding. And that none of Margaret's 3 children had ever given her, not because they didn't love her, but because they were too busy playing the role of the ones Mum needed to take care of. A single tear slipped onto the floor. Claire didn't wipe it away. She turned, walked back to her room as quietly as if she'd never left. But something inside her had cracked. In the kitchen, Margaret opened her eyes. She had known Claire was there, but she didn't speak. Because for the first time in years, she had been the one seen. Sunlight streamed through the frosted skylight, casting angled beams into the old bedroom Luke was tidying. This used to be his room, scribbled sketches on the wall, a box of old cassettes, and a bookshelf now layered in dust. His mother had kept it exactly the same since he left at 20. He'd planned to use a few quiet days to finally fix the sliding window that had jammed shut every summer for the past 3 years. But as he pulled open the creaky wooden drawer beneath his old desk, Luke found something else, a small file box labeled Calendars, since 2000 written in neat, even blue ink. Curiosity pulled him in. Inside were thick, yellowed desk calendars, the kind with space to jot down notes for every day. Luke flipped open a random one. September 2005. The page was filled top to bottom with his mother's handwriting. 6:00 a.m. Wake up. Make breakfast. 7:30. David's dentist appointment. Call reminder. 10:00. Grocery run chicken. Onions, cream for Luke. 12:00. Wash curtains. 3:00. Call Mrs. Thompson. Check on Claire's test. 6:00. Make meat spaghetti. Tom working late. 9:00. Clean living room. Guests coming this weekend. Luke turned the page. Every day was the same. Carefully handwritten. No breaks. No entries for fun or for rest. No me, just everyone else. He flipped faster. 2010, 2015. An entire life documented in meticulous detail. Every morning, who needed what, who was sick, who had a test, what to cook, how many copies to make for school, things he never thought about as a kid because everything was just taken care of. Then he stopped cold. December, his birthday. One simple line hit like a punch to the chest. Buy charcoal pencils, Luke used to love them, not sure if he still draws. He remembered that year he didn't come home, called to say he was busy, forgot his own birthday. Luke sat down on the floor, legs folding beneath him. The old page slipped from his hand and fluttered like a dry leaf to the corner of the room. A life had been recorded not for anyone to read, not to be praised, just to hold everything together, and the one who wrote it had never once been asked, "Are you tired?" He pulled out his phone, snapped a few pictures, not to save them, but to remind himself someone had lived every day for others. And no one had ever stopped to ask what that day felt like for her. The afternoon slowed over the lake like someone had pressed pause on a reel of film. A soft breeze slipped through the curtains, carrying scents of damp wood, fresh-baked cookies, and something else, something older, the smell of memory. In the living room, Margaret's 3 children sat around the round wooden table, the same one that once held Uno cards, birthday cakes, and was always cleaned by their mother after every gathering. Claire was the first to speak. She still held a few photocopied pages from the calendar Luke had found in the attic that morning.
Did you guys know Mom kept track of every single day for 20 years?
What do you mean?
Handwritten calendars, every day who was eating what, who had an appointment, what needed buying, every single day.
It wasn't to remember. It was to function, to keep the whole house from falling apart.
David sat up straighter, his expression part disbelief, part discomfort.
You think she didn't want to do it?
No, she did it because if she didn't, no one else would.
Claire placed the pages down, lifting her gaze to her siblings, people who had grown up beside her, yet somehow it felt like the first time they were really sitting down together like this.
Remember my 10th birthday?
Cat-shaped cake. You loved cats then.
Yeah, Dad cut the cake. Everyone clapped. You were filming, David. But where was Mom?
Almost. See, taking photos.
No. She was in the kitchen baking homemade pizza, because we said we didn't like store-bought cakes. No one asked her to come out. No one even asked if she ate.
Silence fell between them. Luke looked down.
Christmas when I turned 10. Mom's not in a single photo.
That's right. She said I don't have any makeup on and ducked the camera.
It wasn't about the camera. It was that she didn't feel allowed to be in the center. She was always doing something, mopping, washing, fixing the flower vase.
Luke chuckled dryly, shaking his head.
One year I brought a friend home for Thanksgiving. Mom made turkey, ham, all the traditional stuff. My friend said, "Your mom's like the perfect housewife."
What did you say?
I nodded. I was proud. But now, I realize I was proud of her sacrifice and didn't see that that too was a loss.
David was quiet the longest. His hand brushed a small burn mark on the table left from a birthday candle years ago. He didn't remember which birthday, but he remembered Mum wasn't in the photo.
Maybe. We just assumed that's how she wanted to live. Never stopped to ask if she had a choice.
She was the backdrop to every moment. But nobody remembers the backdrop, only what's center stage.
So what do we do now?
The question hovered in the room. 3 siblings, 3 separate lives, 3 different paths sat together. For the first time. No one deflected. No one joked. Only the truth they had grown up inside a silent love and had forgotten to say thank you. And somewhere else in the house, perhaps Margaret was drying glasses, folding towels, cleaning something as always, unaware that her children had finally begun to see her not just as the woman who roasted chickens and patched sleeves, but as someone who had been there and had been invisible for far too long. June evenings faded faster by the lake. In the backyard, the hum of insects had begun beneath wild grass inside the cabin. David stood by the window of his makeshift office, the room that once was Luke's study phone in hand, eyes on Emma playing alone outside. The voice on the other end was clear, his wife, Marianne, back home with their 2 sons.
You forgot to call this morning. Dylan had an art project due. I had no idea if his ship was drawn backwards or not.
Sorry. Everyone here just keeps talking about Mom, about old stuff photos, smiles, things from over a decade ago.
Old stuff. You think your mother's feelings are old stuff?
David paced, brow furrowed. He wasn't used to being cornered, especially not in his own family.
That's not what I meant. But everyone's overanalyzing. Mom never complained. She chose that life.
Or maybe she had no choice.
I don't see what's wrong with it. She was traditional, a homemaker. She raised kids, took care of her husband. That's
The only role you ever thought she had.
David froze, but Marianne didn't stop.
I saw your mother in the kitchen at 6 a.m. No coffee yet. Already making breakfast for 9 people. And where were you, sitting down, saying thanks like it cost nothing?
That's not fair.
No. David, that's truthful. She held this house together every single day, and no one ever asked if she felt held together.
David's breath caught, but it was her last line that cut deepest.
And maybe that's why she never felt like she could say anything at all.
Silence. David didn't reply. Neither did Marianne, perhaps knowing that pushing further would only make him shut down. He hung up, sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed to his forehead. Every word she'd said, every single one was true. But why did the truth sting so much? The door hadn't closed fully. Voices, however quiet, traveled easily in this old wooden house where sound carried more easily than emotion. A shadow paused at the end of the hallway, not intentionally listening, but unable to walk away either. Tom, 72. Hair white around the temples, slightly hunched, wore a flannel shirt tucked into rolled-up khakis, the timeless uniform of a retired Midwest man. In his hand a half-dried wine glass and an old dish towel. He stood there, caught in an unfamiliar posture, not eavesdropping. Exactly. But involuntarily struck by something he'd kept buried for over 4 decades, the thought that his wife had been silent for far too long. Tom was never a man of many words. He worked 37 years at the shipyard, came home on time, sat in the same chair at dinner, read the same paper. For him, love was duty done, bills paid, a roof that didn't leak through storms. Margaret did everything else, what he'd always assumed was a woman's nature. But now, standing in this quiet hallway, Tom heard something he had never let himself believe. Maybe Margaret hadn't chosen her silence. Maybe she'd simply endured it. His hand trembled, not from age, but from something far younger, shame. He remembered every dinner she served, every holiday card she wrote, every scarf she knitted for the grandkids, and never once had he asked, "Do you ever wish someone did this for you?" He turned from the hallway, but not with the usual steady pace. Tom walked straight into the kitchen. Margaret stood with her back to him, slicing onions, butter sizzled on the skillet behind her. He stopped in the doorway, silently watching her. Her back was more hunched than he remembered. Her hair held more silver than he ever noticed. Her hands moved quickly with the knife, but her wrist trembled just slightly, alone, silent, like every evening for years, silent. Tom said nothing, but for the first time in years. He looked at Margaret, not as his wife, but as a woman who had given far too much for him, without anyone ever counting. The sun dipped low, its rays filtering through the oak branches outside the porch, casting flickering patches of light across the kitchen wall. Margaret sat at the table, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, eyes fixed gently on the yard where Emma was arranging stones into the shape of a heart. The moment felt suspended, a kind of stillness that bordered on sacred. Emma placed the final stone, stood up, brushed off her dress, and ran back into the kitchen.
Grandma, I finished. Can you come see?
Maybe in a bit. Sweetie, Grandma has a bit of a headache.
Emma pulled a chair out and sat across from her. Her gaze, steady and curious, always seemed to look through people like she was searching for something behind every smile.
Do you like being in pictures?
Margaret looked up, a simple question, but clearly one she hadn't expected. Not because it had never been asked before, but because no one ever thought it should be.
I suppose not.
Why not?
Because I never felt like there was much worth photographing.
Emma frowned. She lowered her head for a moment, then spoke softly, but with a clarity that made grown-ups pause.
But you have really beautiful eyes. And I think people with beautiful eyes should be photographed, so no one forgets they were ever here.
Margaret froze. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but because, for the first time in so long, someone had said, "You're worth remembering." The kitchen door creaked open. Claire stood in the doorway, arms full of folded kitchen towels. Having caught the tail end of the exchange, she didn't step in right away. She just watched her mother, the woman she once believed was solid as stone, trying to hide a smile and not let the tears fall in front of her granddaughter. Claire felt her heart sink. She turned away, placed the towels on the counter, and pulled out her phone. Scrolling through her photo library. Hundreds of pictures, yet her mother appeared in only a handful, small, blurry, off to the side. At the end of the hallway, Tom stood behind the curtain. He hadn't heard every word, but he'd seen enough. Margaret shielding her face, Emma holding her hand, Claire turning away to wipe her glasses. A quiet moment, but Tom knew something in their family had started to shift. The kitchen lights spilled across the tiled floor like a thin curtain. Reflecting the familiar movements, Margaret stood by the stove, stirring ginger stew with a wooden spoon, dabbing sweat from her forehead with a dish towel. Evening had crept in, but dinner was still unfinished like so many meals over the past 40 years. Emma stood at the counter, washing green onions one by one. Glancing at her grandmother, she noticed Margaret's hands moving slower than usual. Each gesture looked like it cost her a piece of what strength she had left. Claire set the plates. David grabbed water from the fridge. Luke perched on the old kitchen counter, munching cookies like he used to as a teenager. Tom sat in the living room, newspaper folded in his lap, his ears tuned to the familiar rhythm of kitchen sounds. Then a crash, the shattering of glass, sharp and sudden like an alarm bell. Margaret froze. The spoon dropped from her hand. Her body swayed, then collapsed sideways against the counter. The glass hit the floor and broke into pieces, water soaking the hem of her dress.
Grandma!
Claire screamed, rushing over to catch her. David lunged from behind the table, dropping to his knees to check her pulse. Luke kicked back his chair.
Call an ambulance now.
Margaret lay on her side, eyes closed, lips pale. Claire cradled her head, tears falling before words could form. David pressed his ear to her chest, then looked up, face tight with fear.
Blood pressure's crashing. Severely dehydrated. Classic collapse from exhaustion.
Claire's fingers trembled on the phone screen, her voice cracked through sobs.
My mom, she's 63, unconscious, no response. Willow Lane, the lake house.
Emma stood frozen in the doorway, eyes locked on her grandmother. Her hands clenched tightly, lips pressed white. She didn't cry, but her whole body was strung tight like a snapped wire. Tom entered last. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, stunned. In 40 years of living with Margaret, he had never seen her fall. She always stood through heat. Storms, arguments, forgotten birthdays. And now she lay there like a bridge that had carried too much. The ambulance arrived. David rode with her, Claire followed by car. Luke held Emma's hand, guiding her to the back seat. She didn't speak, just curled up against the car door, staring into the dark outside. Tom said nothing. He sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed out the window. His hands gripped his knees, veins raised, a 72-year-old man who had worked every day without rest but had never once asked, "Is my wife tired?" The hospital lights were cold and bright. Margaret was taken into observation. The doctor's words landed heavy. She's suffering from nervous fatigue. Stage 2 exhaustion, sleep deprivation, blood pressure imbalance, signs of mild depression. No one spoke. Claire rested her head on Luke's shoulder. David stood with his back to the hallway. For the first time, none of Margaret's children knew what to do because no one was there to guide them. Emma sat beside Tom in the waiting room. She leaned into him, not like a child clinging to an adult, but like someone strong enough to share his weariness. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze as if wondering how a child could be the one holding him up. And then After years of standing solid, maybe since he was a boy, Tom bowed his head, and a single tear slid down the hand resting on Emma's shoulder. Emma didn't look up, but she turned her hand, wrapped it around his weathered fingers, firm, warm, the only person who had ever given him something to lean on right at the moment he needed it most. Night fell over the small town hospital like a thick blanket, draping over long hallways and sterile glass windows. The overhead fluorescent lights cast pale reflections on spotless tiles, while the soft footfalls of nurses echoed like water, dripping steadily in silence. In the last room down the hall, Margaret lay still. Her body seemed smaller in the light blue hospital gown. Silver hair scattered gently across her forehead. An IV line dripped slowly into her left arm. The monitor beside her bed beeped in a steady rhythm, alive, but fragile. Claire stood outside the glass door, arms crossed, forehead resting lightly against it. David sat on the bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor but seeing nothing. Luke stood against the wall, arms folded, eyes closed, not sleeping, but holding something back. Emma had been taken home by Mandy, Claire's cousin, before she left. The girl looked up at Tom, voice hoarse.
She's gonna wake up, right, Grandpa?
Tom bent down, placed a hand on her shoulder. He didn't promise, he simply said,
Your grandma is the strongest person I've ever known.
now. He sat alone in the hospital room, on a cold plastic chair beside Margaret's bed. His hand rested lightly on hers, thin, pale, colder than usual. He gave it a gentle squeeze as if apologizing, wordlessly. Tom had lived his life by one rule: men kept the boat steady, women kept the fire burning. But tonight, the fire had gone out, and for the first time, he didn't know how to do anything but wait. He looked at her face. The wrinkles traced a map of a long life, nights without sleep, smiles forced for the sake of others, tears swallowed because she didn't want the children to worry. And he had thought all of that was just natural. Now, nothing felt natural, only silence remained.
If you don't wake up, then who am I?
Outside, Claire stepped closer to David, speaking softly without looking away from the glass.
I've never seen Mom lying down like that.
She's the last person I ever thought would fall.
If she doesn't wake up, I don't know what kind of family we still are.
Luke didn't say anything. He stepped forward and placed a hand on both their shoulders. Neither pulled away. A small gesture, but it held an apology, forgiveness, and a promise never to let this happen again. At that moment, the hospital door opened. A young nurse stepped out, chart in hand.
Mrs. Margaret just responded with light movement in her left hand. Heart rate is stabilizing. She may regain consciousness in a few hours.
The three siblings exhaled, all at once, no cheering, no smiles, just one collective breath that had been held too long, finally released. Inside, Tom bowed his head further. He didn't cry, but his grip on Margaret's hand tightened firmer, softer, like it was the first time. Morning light spilled into the lakeside cabin, stretching across the wooden floor and walls, but it didn't wake the kitchen the way it used to. No scent of toast, no whistle of boiling tea, no soft, steady voice of Margaret. Claire entered first. Her hand flicked the light switch out of habit, but she stood still. Every plate and cup remained exactly where Margaret had left them, but somehow they felt colder now. Tom sat at the table, newspaper folded on his lap. Unread, his gaze fixed quietly out the window. David walked in next, coffee in hand, hair still damp from a morning shower. Luke shuffled downstairs, draped in an old hoodie, letting out a long yawn before stopping.
Has anyone started cooking yet?
I was just about to.
Mom usually has yogurt ready for Emma. I couldn't find the kind she likes.
They began fumbling through drawers and cabinets like guests in a kitchen that used to be their own. Claire reached for eggs, unsure if Margaret used brown or farm-raised. David tried making tea, but the ratio was off. Luke burned the first 2 slices of toast. When breakfast was finally laid out, it looked more like the result of a trial run than a familiar ritual. The eggs were rubbery, the tea weak, jam sliding off the toast. They sat down, but no one reached for their plate. Margaret's chair remained empty, its back slightly tilted as if still holding her shape. Emma stepped in, hair tousled, clutching a small book. She glanced at the table, then around the room.
Where's Grandma?
She's still resting at the hospital. Sweetheart, the doctor said she needs more sleep.
But where's her breakfast?
No one answered. Claire bit her lip. David lowered his cup. Luke turned toward the window.
No one cooks like Grandma does.
Her words were soft, but they settled heavy in every corner of the room. Then the phone rang. Claire lunged for it, pulling it from her pocket. Her eyes flicked to the screen, Lakeside Hospital. Everyone froze. Claire pressed it to her ear, voice urgent.
This is Claire, yes?
A pause, then a trembling smile bloomed across her face.
She's awake. Mom opened her eyes.
Emma threw her arms around Claire, burying her face into her shoulder. David clapped a hand on Luke's back, no words, just a tight squeeze. Tom stood up from the table, moving toward the door, his jacket half zipped.
Let's go. She's not waking up alone.
The whole family shot up, plates still full, chairs not pushed in, but none of it mattered. The door closed gently behind them, leaving behind a kitchen filled with the scent of weak tea and burnt toast. But this time, they all left with the same promise in their hearts. From now on, she wouldn't have to stand up alone ever again. While the family remained at the hospital with Margaret, Claire asked to leave briefly to gather essentials, some clean clothes and toiletries for her mother. Returning to the empty house, she stepped into Margaret's bedroom, a space her mother had once called the quiet back of the world. Everything was still tidy, as if Margaret had only stepped out for the afternoon. The bed was neatly made, pillows placed just so. On the wooden dresser sat a small jar of dried lavender and lilies arranged last spring, still faintly fragrant. Claire opened the nightstand drawer in search of fresh undergarments, but her hand brushed against something softer. Older and more intimate, a worn leather-bound notebook, its edges frayed, unlabeled, frayed. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first line, in slanted blue ink, read, "Things no one remembers, but still must be done." It began in 2003, the year Luke started elementary school. The first pages were filled with lists. Clean basement heater, January. Check Tom's auto insurance renewal, February. Buy birthday card for David. March. Get the musical kind this time. Claire flipped further. Page 17, just one line. Dated May 24th, 2007. Claire cried after losing her first job. No one knew. She came into my room at midnight and lay still beside me. I said nothing, just held her. She was strong again the next morning. I cried from relief, but alone. In the kitchen, page 32, the handwriting slightly heavier, slanted, as if her hand trembled. Tom said not to worry the kids, but maybe that's why they never knew I get tired too. Page 55, stained with a faint watermark. My birthday this year, everyone forgot. I pretended I had too. Claire clutched the notebook tighter. She flipped faster pages 60, 78, 90, all pieces of a quiet woman who had held the world steady without letting anyone see her shaking. The final page dated just 1 month ago. This month, my body no longer listens. I get winded climbing stairs. My vision blurs. My hands go numb. I think maybe I should say something, but I'm afraid they'll worry. And I always think maybe I can just push a little longer. Claire lowered the notebook into her lap. She covered her mouth. Tears soaked through the hem of her jeans. She didn't sob. She didn't cry out. She just sat there as if hearing her mother's true voice for the first time. A breeze slipped through the open window. The page fluttered like a sigh. Claire reached down to catch it. On the spine of the notebook, nearly faded, was a final line. If someone finds this, don't feel guilty. Just next time, ask if Mum is tired. She stood, wiped her eyes, then gently folded the notebook and slid it into her coat pocket. As she stepped out of the room, Claire was no longer the daughter who'd never asked what her mother was feeling. Midday light filtered softly through the hospital room blinds, washing the white walls in a gentle glow. Margaret still lay motionless, eyes open but silent. She hadn't spoken, hadn't moved much, but she blinked now and then, and every so often gently squeezed Claire's hand as if to say, "I'm still here." Claire sat at the edge of the bed, her canvas bag resting on the floor beside her. Inside it was the old brown leather journal, a quiet piece of Margaret's soul, now held in her daughter's care. David entered first, carrying a coffee and a bag of soft pastries. Luke followed. Hoodie slouched over his shoulders, still texting Emma back at home. Tom came last, walking slowly, hands tucked in his coat pockets, eyes locked on Margaret every step of the way. Claire looked up and gave a small wave.
I found this in Mom's nightstand. I think we need to read it.
She pulled the notebook out and placed it on her lap. No one smiled, no one interrupted. She opened to the first page, reading softly but clearly.
Things no one remembers, but still must be done.
David furrowed his brow. Luke sat down, resting a hand on his knee. Tom moved closer, standing at the head of the bed. His eyes stayed on Margaret, but every word Claire read seemed to strike straight through him. Page 17, Claire read the entry about losing her first job, sneaking into her mother's room at midnight, finding quiet comfort, and how Margaret cried alone in the kitchen the next morning, in silent relief. And
You never told us that.
I never told Mom either, but she knew.
Page 32, Tom said not to worry the kids, but maybe that's why they never knew I was tired too. Tom shut his eyes, took a small step back, his fists clenched, then slowly opened.
I thought I was protecting you all. I didn't realize. I was placing the whole weight on your mother's shoulders.
Luke looked at him.
You always taught us to be strong, but no one ever asked what she needed.
Claire turned the page. Page 55, Margaret's birthday, forgotten by everyone, and she had pretended to forget it too. David rubbed his forehead, letting out a curse, not loud, not angry, just heavy with guilt.
She made birthday dinners for all of us, every year, with a different cake for each kid, and we...
Margaret blinked slowly. Claire paused, then looked down at her.
Mom, can you hear us?
Margaret's fingers twitched. Her left hand gently pulled at the bedsheet.
Margie, I'm sorry. I know. There are things I can't undo. But, if you'll let me, I want to start listening, really listening from now on.
Margaret didn't speak, but a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, trailing down her temple and soaking into the pillow. No words needed. Claire closed the journal and set it on the bedside table.
We'll read the rest, but from now on, you won't need to write anymore, because we'll ask.
Every day.
And we'll listen.
Tom bent down, resting his hand over hers, warmer now.
I'm here, not as the man of the house, but as your husband. Truly.
In the sterile air of the hospital room, the mood shifted. The heart monitor still beeped steadily, but this time, its rhythm didn't sound like fear. It sounded like something beginning to heal. Evening settled gently outside the hospital window. The soft light slanted in, shimmering across the tiled floor like a wrinkled tablecloth at the end of a long dinner. No one spoke, no one moved to leave. No one. Claire, David, and Luke sat on 3 small plastic chairs. Tom leaned against the corner of the table, one hand resting lightly on the hospital bed rail. Margaret's leather journal still sat on the bedside table, a silent witness to everything that had just been revealed. Margaret hadn't spoken yet, but her eyes were open, and they moved, scanning each face, each line, each gaze, as if taking inventory of a life that was suddenly, fully present. Claire spoke first.
Mom, we're all here.
Margaret blinked, slowly, but deliberately. Her right hand twitched a slight tremble, like a small bird stretching its wing.
Can you hear us?
Margaret's lips moved barely. Just a breath of sound came out. Tom leaned in close, eyes wet.
It's okay. You don't need to speak yet. Just hearing you breathe is enough for me.
Margaret blinked again. Then once more, she looked around the room, counting, it seemed, to make sure everyone was here. And then from that dry, fragile throat came a sound, softer than a whisper but clear enough for everyone to hear.
You're all still here.
No one replied at first, because every throat was tight. David turned away, wiping his eyes. Luke stood and took her hand. Claire nodded again and again, tears sliding freely.
We're here. Mom, we're all here. And we're staying from now on.
Tom sat down beside the bed, his old, veined hand wrapping around hers.
Babe, we've still got things to do. You know, I haven't bought you that ticket to Paris yet. Remember.
Margaret smiled, tired but warm, like the last light of day slipping through the curtain. She didn't speak again. She simply closed her eyes, not in weakness this time, but in peace. Outside the hallway window, dusk continued to fall, but in that quiet hospital room, a different kind of light had been lit, not loud, not grand, but enough to illuminate a lifetime of silence. It was Wednesday morning. The family gathered in Margaret's hospital room. The doctor reviewed her chart, checked her vitals, and after a moment of silence, smiled gently.
You're recovering very well, Mrs. Margaret, barring any unexpected issues. You might be discharged tomorrow. But remember, no heavy work, no kitchen chores, just rest and connect with family.
Margaret looked over at Tom. He nodded. Then she turned to her adult children and realized for the first time they appeared more anxious than she was. Claire immediately opened her phone to take notes. David made a call home to prep her room. Luke texted Emma, "Start painting the grandest welcome home picture." The next morning at the lakeside house, the family sprang into action. Claire set up a large whiteboard in the kitchen, writing with a marker, "Mum's care schedule, no exceptions." Below, each day was assigned. Monday, David reads the morning paper to Mum. Tuesday, Claire gives Mum a shoulder massage, her favorite. Wednesday, Luke handles the flower garden. Thursday, Tom tells an old family story with prep. Weekend, no one lets Mum step into the kitchen. David chuckled at first.
Sounds like military orders, circa Civil War.
But when Claire gave him that look, he just ruffled her hair and whipped out his phone to set reminders. Luke dragged his toolbox out back, removed a deck step, and installed a sturdy railing. He taped a soft, iron-rich meal ideas chart to the fridge. No one asked him to. It was as if he'd been waiting for permission to finally help. Emma painted a giant picture, Grandma sitting under a peach tree, reading a book, with a cat named Ginger Tea curled beside her. Claire printed it on decal paper and stuck it on the fridge door. And Tom, earlier that morning, he went into the bathroom, shaved, dressed in a crisp, white collared shirt, and straightened his tie. When Claire spotted him, she raised an eyebrow.
Dressing up for a date, Dad.
Yes, with the woman who raised me, right?
Claire just smiled, knowing she'd answered her own question. They all stood on the porch as the hospital car pulled up. The door opened. Margaret supported herself as she stepped down. Still a bit frail, but her eyes were steady. And the very first thing she saw was not flowers, gifts, or signs, but her whole family, shoulder to shoulder, no one missing. Claire stepped forward and gently took her mother's hand.
Ready for a fresh start.
With this support crew, I don't plan on saying no.
They walked inside into a home prepared not just with things, but with hearts that had genuinely changed. It was the first dinner after Margaret's return, and a gentle rain began to fall. Rain pattered evenly on the tiled roof and whispered against window panes, wrapping the lakeside house in a soft, cozy shell, like a thick blanket on a cold first winter night. In the kitchen, it wasn't Margaret standing over the stove as she had for 30 years, it was Claire, wearing her mum's beige floral apron, freshly laundered and ironed flat. David carried a steaming pot of ginger soup to the table. Setting it down gently in the center, Luke arranged the bowls one by one, just as Margaret had taught Tom on the left, Margaret facing the window and her 3 children filling the seats to her right and left. Emma placed a glass of lemonade at her grandmother's plate. On the rim was a small note for someone who never got to sit long enough to take a sip. Margaret walked slowly from her bedroom, not leaning on a cane, but supported by Tom's steady arm at her elbow. She paused when she saw the table set as if she had arranged it herself, but entirely done by others.
It's the ginger soup you always make when we're sick. I remembered the recipe because you taught us, but I didn't listen before. Now I'm paying attention.
And the salad no onions, because you don't eat raw onions.
And no strawberries in the dessert, because you're slightly allergic. We remembered everything now.
Margaret sat in her seat, something she hadn't done in years, without rising midway to tend to the oven, to call someone to wash their hands, or to fetch the missing spoon. Everything was ready, complete, and just how she liked it, even though she never asked. They ate in respectful silence, not tense, but quiet with appreciation, each person trying to imprint this moment the first time she was truly the guest in her own home. Tom poured tea, his hand steady but eyes glistening.
Chamomile tea, no sugar, just the way you like it.
You remembered?
I started writing yesterday. Like you. I've learned.
Margaret smiled, not out loud, but a slow, quiet smile like sunshine after a night of rain, enough to warm everyone in the room. When the meal ended, Emma stood and brought over the painting she'd made for Grandma.
You can put this in your room, to remember that this time. You stayed for the whole dinner.
Margaret reached out and hugged her granddaughter. Her eyes glistened.
Thank you. Emma, I will remember, and I will sit for many more dinners yet.
Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, the warmth didn't fade. No one noticed how cool the air had grown. On the table, Margaret's tea stayed warm because this time she had time to drink it. Saturday afternoon. Sunlight stretched across the backyard of the lakeside home. The lavender was in full bloom, its scent gentle in the breeze. White lilies tilted toward the sun just the way Margaret liked them, not bright and bold, but pure and calm. Tom held Margaret's arm as they carefully stepped down the wooden porch. The new handrail Luke had installed felt sturdy under her touch. Margaret placed her hand on it, nodding softly.
I probably don't need it, but let's leave it. It's beautiful.
Definitely better looking than the guy who hammered it in.
They walked out into the yard. The grass was freshly cut, the path lined with pebbles. Sage and dill sprouted up beside each other. The air carried the scent of damp earth and something else, something like memory. Margaret paused by the purple chrysanthemums.
I used to think if I had more time, I'd learn the piano again. Do you remember the old upright?
The one you stopped playing when Claire was born?
That's the one. After that, I just dusted it. Never touched the keys again.
They took a few more steps.
I also wanted to make a cookbook, not to sell it, just so the kids could read it when I'm not around.
Tom stopped. He took her hand.
You're not around anytime soon. You made it through this, not to start preparing to leave, but to really live.
Margaret looked at him. Her eyes weren't sad, but deep, like a lake that's seen many seasons.
Tom, do you think we still have time? I mean, time to really live, not just survive?
Tom didn't answer right away. He looked around the garden, every row of herbs, every stone this life they built together, always rushing through it.
If you're still breathing, still seeing sunlight, then yes, we still have time.
He squeezed her hand, not hard, but steady, like a vow.
If you want to play again, I'll get you the comfiest piano bench. If you want to publish that cookbook, I'll learn how to use the printer. If you want to see the south of France, we'll find a way.
I'm scared of flying.
Then we'll take a train, just as long as we don't give up.
The wind passed again, softer this time. A few leaves floated by their feet. Margaret sat on the stone bench near the bougainvillea trellis. Tom sat beside her. They didn't speak further. Just two people who had spent nearly a lifetime together, finally sitting still to think about how to live the rest of it. After dinner, just as the rain eased up, the whole family gathered in the living room. The soft glow of the floor lamp reflected off the old wooden coffee table, the same table that had witnessed hundreds of small celebrations and thousands of unwritten stories. Emma pulled an old camera from her backpack, the kind that used film, the one Claire used in college, now repaired for her daughter to explore. She adjusted the lens and looked up.
Grandma, can we take a picture, a real one, with you in the middle?
I've never been in the middle. Doesn't feel right.
But you deserve to be this time. You won't be left out.
And you won't be behind the camera either.
You'll be the reason we're smiling.
Margaret hesitated. Then she nodded. Claire pulled up a chair and helped her mother sit at the center. Tom took a seat to her left, his hand resting gently behind her. David and Luke stood on either side, each placing a hand on her shoulders. Emma sat cross-legged at her feet, hugging her grandmother's knees. Claire set the timer on the camera, then ran into the frame. Click. The flash popped for a second. In that brief moment, no one blinked. No one forced a smile. Just eyes filled with something deep for the woman who had silently held up everyone else's world. When the photo was developed a few days later, it was framed and placed right in the center of the family gallery wall. And for the first time in 63 years, in a photo where everyone was present, Margaret smiled, a real smile. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.